We do have time, but still we'll get on with it. Megan Easterbrook-Smith. Yes, please start with your presentation.
So I'm really pleased to be here today. So I'm speaking today about something which is part of my broader PhD project. So how the less is better rhetoric is damaging to sex worker rights. In 2003, New Zealand introduced the Prostitution Reform Act, decriminalising all forms of sex work in New Zealand, including street sex work for permanent residents and citizens. My research considers the ways in which the acceptability of sex work and workers in New Zealand has been discursively produced in news media texts since 2010 as part of a wider PhD project. An area of particular interest which I will be speaking about today is the way in which the presence of advertorial language and framing in news media texts, particularly from independent workers and agencies, has functioned to produce... Sorry? Slow. Thank you. Has functioned to produce a less is better rhetoric, which is ultimately harmful to the labour rights and working conditions of many sex workers in New Zealand. Briefly, when I speak about independent workers, I mean workers who arrange their own advertising and screen and book their own clients. Within the New Zealand model, agency refers to a brothel run on an appointment-only basis, where many workers are on call, and the sex workers are typically independent contractors who may or may not pay for advertising depending on the particular agency, but who don't have contact with clients outside of bookings. Parlours are brothels which run on a shift-based system where workers will be expected to work structured shifts and usually are based on a lounge situation where clients can come in and speak with workers before deciding if they want to make a booking and who with. The parlour format of work is usually coded as being higher volume, with a slightly lower pay per hour of direct client contact than agency work, and also involves a degree of uncompensated labour in the form of speaking to and entertaining clients in the lounge without any guarantee it will result in a booking. Many brothels also charge a daily shift fee from workers. While my larger project also discusses the production of acceptability as it relates to street sex work, I will not be directly discussing that in today's presentation. My primary focus in this paper is in considering the ways in which high and low volume indoor workers are discursively produced in recent news media. In researching the production of acceptability of full service sex work in New Zealand, I collected news media text from New Zealand's major news outlets, specifically the Stuff.co.nz series of newspapers comprising Wellington's only daily newspaper and several regional newspapers with largely syndicated content, and the New Zealand Herald website, which covers Auckland's major daily newspaper and associated daily and weekly papers from smaller cities and towns. In addition to this, I also searched for relevant texts from nationwide TV and radio coverage. I ceased collecting new items when I found the information contained within them was being repeated, creating a situation of diminishing returns. Throughout the process of analysing the collected texts, I determined that among those most frequently interviewed as experts on agency and independent sex workers and their working conditions were 3 agency owners and managers, as well as Catherine Healy, the National Coordinator of the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, or NZPC. The 3 most prominent agencies and their associated owners were Funhouse with Mary Brennan, Bon Ton with Jennifer Saunis, and The Bedroom with Sarah. In analysing these texts, I also noted down the words used to refer to sex work and workers, as well as which speakers were most prominent and frequently quoted in the texts. Among the words and phrases used most often to refer to workers and agencies or working independently were sex workers, sex work, sex industry, as well as girls or escorts. Many of these texts also use positive modifiers in labelling workers, with high flyers who turn to escorting, using lovely woman, beautiful attentive woman, and highly educated escorts all in a single article. It was also common for these texts to use the descriptors preferred by agencies in their own website advertising copy to describe the workers. And speaking about agencies, they were often referred to as high-end, upmarket, high-class, or elite. Examples of this language can be found most readily in 3 texts: the working girls class, Mary Brennan, domination and submission, and high flyers who turn to escorting. Agencies were also more likely to be referred to as establishments or sometimes boudoirs than brothels. A frequent trope in the texts I analysed was to compare agency or independent workers favourably with workers in high-volume parlours, and the language used to describe these 2 modes of working indicates the production of agency and independent work is more acceptable. This analysis provides an insight into the ways in which agency and independent sex workers are constructed within the media. There is a reassurance built into the descriptions of them that they are both lovely and highly formally educated, the kind of clarification which speaks to the stigma which news outlets both expect and perpetuate. The educational loveliness of the workers is remarked upon only because it is presumed to be remarkable. The secondary function here is the beginning of a construction of workers as worthy of respect based on characteristics other than their work or other than their personhood. The workplaces of agency and independent workers are also described in such a way as to set them apart from higher volume brothels. They're variously high-end, high-class, upmarket or elite, all words which appear distinctly advertorial. Those most able to construct and define the discourse around agency and independent sex work in New Zealand post-decriminalisation then appear to be primarily owners and managers, not all of whom have actively engaged in full-service sex work themselves or in any sex work. In part, this may be because running or owning a brothel is a less stigmatised occupation than actively participating in sex work, placing management in a position of greater authority and with fewer penalties for being a public figure than current sex workers. The repetition of a few select sources, all of whom are managers or owners, moves the ability to drive the discourse about sex work away from current sex workers, whose concerns may be different to owners. Furthermore, owners and managers of agencies may also speak to news organisations with a specific desire to advertise or elevate the standing of their own business. In correspondence with seek.co.nz, Trade Me Jobs, and from quotes given by Student Job Search, 3 of New Zealand's major job listing websites, I've determined that none of these agencies allow listings advertising for sex workers. Therefore, managers and owners wishing to recruit new sex workers may need to appeal to potential employees in other ways. I will be discussing the advertorial emphasis with an eye to its specific discursive function. The repeated emphasis on workers seeing fewer clients, or a different kind of client, is, I believe, a way in which agency and independent workers are constructed as more acceptable. Additionally, the type of worker who is likely to engage in agency work in particular is created through comparisons with high volume or brothel work, and through the use of extensive descriptions of the workers in workplaces. The specifics of client numbers are seldom dealt with directly. However, the texts dealing with agency workers are at pains to mention the potential high earnings of their staff, in addition to the prominence of discussion of workers making enough to avoid taking out student loans, to start a small business, or in one instance having earned enough for an entire week's living expenses by a Tuesday evening. One exception to this is from Brennan in Sex Industry Doing It Tough, in which she comments her workers would see 1 to 2 clients a day, followed by a comment that some of her clientele book for multiple hours, an overnight period, or whisk a girl away to Europe for 2 weeks. The construction here is of agency sex workers as a luxury, and by extension, the implication that there are fewer clients who can afford their services. In Behind the Red Lights of New Zealand's Brothels, the owner of Bonton comments that one of the things which sets them apart from other brothels, implicitly referencing parlours profiled earlier in this particular text, is that all clients must book an appointment, unlike brothels where anyone can just walk in off the streets. She also comments that clients used to lower-end brothels are more likely to make specific course demands. Here, the owner both situates her business as one that is selective both about who they hire and about what clients they allow. Lower-end brothels are constructed as focusing exclusively on sex, whereas low-volume and higher-priced sex industry workplaces frequently emphasise the emotional and mental connection which workers construct with clients so as to differentiate themselves. Soundness is also quoted in School's Cash Went on Sex and High Living, saying that spending $400 per week would not have made a man allegedly accused of spending misappropriated funds at her agency one of their big spenders, who allegedly spend up to $2,500 a night. The function of this emphasis on clients who can afford to spend significant amounts of money works both to construct the agencies as a luxury service provider and also to give the impression that workers don't have a financial need to see many clients. Their financial needs can be fulfilled by seeing a few carefully selected clients per week. This impression of glamour and luxury is also achieved through descriptive means in the media text analysed. The phrases and descriptions used to speak about the workplaces, and by extension the workers, also function to create an aura of success and wealth. This is in keeping with some of the work of Ali Hochschild in discussing the emotional labour of creating an aura of success and ease through physical surroundings. In video coverage dealing with Funhouse, Mary Brennan is seen showing a journalist around her premises and commenting on how they provide clean linen, clean towels and immaculate bathrooms. And in a 7 Sharp feature, she comments on the ironed pillowcases in their bedrooms, and a journalist is heard to comment that the room looks like an expensive hotel. In High Flyers Who Turn to Escorting, the bedroom is described as Wellington's newest escort agency, and the journalist opens the text with a description of the workplace. Later in the same text, Sarah, the owner and manager of the bedroom, is interviewed, commenting that she wanted to avoid reminding clients that they're paying for a service, instead making the parlour feel more like their mistress's bedroom. This language and phrasing furthers the image of agencies as being both expensive and luxurious. The repeated emphasis by Brennan in particular in media coverage detailing with her agency dealing with her agency on the cleanliness suggests she is positioning it in a favourable comparison to other workplaces, constructing her agency both as different and better than other sex industry workplaces in New Zealand, and also using the cleanliness of her workplace as a proxy for the cleanliness of the work and workers. Even within a discourse about sex work, which aims to normalise it and make it more acceptable, there is still a strong presumption that a form of sex work which results in workers seeing fewer clients or having less actual sexual contact with them is preferable, with the subtext from agency owners that it is cleaner. In The Working Girls class, author Bridget Bones wrote, "In most high-end agencies, women who've previously worked as escorts in low-class establishments or on the street will be turned away. The aim in doing this is to ensure the safety of everyone involved by further removing the risk of STI." The article also comments, "Agencies also tend to turn away women who are virgins and women who confess to having a large amount of unsafe sex. Of course, this is not the same for all agencies. Lower class agencies tend to accept anyone who wants to become a sex worker." In these two statements, the author simultaneously implies that workers who have undertaken street sex work or high volume work are more likely to be infected with an STI, and that agencies are more selective than high volume workplaces. The author also uncritically refers to high volume workplaces as low class after the initial use of quotes, without attributing this descriptor to any of the interviewees in the text. Through the phrase, "lower class agencies tend to accept anyone," the author makes a clear value judgment about acceptable modes of being a sex worker. Working for an agency, it is suggested, puts a worker in a position of having been selected and being less likely to have an STI. Cleanliness here is also constructed as being free from sexually transmitted infections, positioning a worker's STI status as a value judgment about their moral character and value as a worker and woman. While the Working Girls class is the most obvious example within the analysed text of attempting to align low-volume work and seeing fewer clients with acceptability and cleanliness, this theme occurs throughout coverage of agency and independent workers, often in tandem with applied criticism of the workers who do work in brothels. In one interview, Brennan speaks in a condescending way about how they're mushrooms kept in the dark and fed bullshit, while Sana sneeringly says that high-volume brothels are like a zoo, and Sarah of the bedroom says that brothel workers frequently work 12-hour shifts and sleep all day, implying that sleeping after a night shift is somehow aberrant or suspicious behaviour. Notably missing from agency owners' discussions of workers who engage in brothel work is a comment on what kind of worker they hire. The specifics are frequently obscured with encoded language about workers being current students or being articulate, but in an analysis of the workers who were listed on each agency's website this February, it's apparent that there's a very specific demographic present within the higher-priced and lower-volume agencies. The implication from comments by Brennan and Saunis, and from news media coverage of these more expensive low-volume agencies, is that workers who seek to be employed by them are making a more informed choice. Inspecting the demographic most represented among workers employed by these agencies reveals that the suggestion to be at best optimistic and more realistically reproduces existing social and cultural oppressions along lines of race, class, age, trans or cis status and size. As of February 2016, by inspecting the workers listed on each website, the average age bracket of workers at all three agencies was in their 20s, with workers listed as being a size 4 to 10, with the most commonly listed size at Funhouse and Bonton being an 8 and the bedroom a 7. At each agency, most workers were white. The proportion of workers described as being white, NZ European, or in other terms which heavily implied their whiteness or ability to be marketed as such, ranged from 82% to 94%. All of the workers at these three agencies at this time were cisgender. In Sex Industry Doing It Tough, Brennan is quoted as saying that she only hires 5% of the people who apply to work for her. saying potential workers must be well educated, personable and genuinely keen to work. Brennan's comments here appear to be reiterating the acceptability construction evident throughout discourse about agency and independent workers, both mentioning the exclusiveness of her workers and the exclusiveness of their services. Her choice of words when describing a successful applicant is also revealing. She doesn't focus specifically on appearance or actual sexual contact as a focus for workers, instead referring to their mental and emotional labour in the form of workers appearing genuinely keen to work. This phrasing obscures the actual labour which goes into sex work. It expects the interaction carried out between worker and client to be organic and authentic, and obscures the specific emotional labour carried out by each worker in delivering this impression. However, the repeated emphasis on workers being keen to work, or as seen elsewhere in text featuring Brennan really loving sex, again assists with constructing a most acceptable way in which to do sex work. This production of the acceptable sex worker then assumes that she, as all the workers at the three most prominent agencies within media, text and women, enjoys her job and has a genuine connection with the small number of clients that she sees. The overarching message delivered by owners is that workers are free to choose how and when they work and enjoy their work. However, workers are seldom given the opportunity to comment on if they get an amount of work they find satisfactory. And workers identified in stories are universally current agency employees, who presumably are therefore limited in their ability to speak about their working conditions freely and without fear of reprisal. The effective discursive outcome of this style of news media coverage is the message that the optimal way to be a sex worker is to do very little sex work, or at least see as few clients as possible and to enjoy the small number of interactions one does have. This rhetoric is fundamentally advertorial in function, and obscures the nature of the actual work carried out, both to appeal to clients who desire this kind of seamless fantasy experience and to workers by misrepresenting the degree of labour required in the work and arguably the earning potential. The common theme evident through much of the discourse about agency and independent workers is that sex workers who desire better working conditions, with better working conditions presumed to be the same thing as fewer clients, and pay should move to agencies, while failing to acknowledge or address the limitations of who is able to be contracted by these agencies. The effect of this discourse in news media texts is to suggest that only some workers deserve good working conditions and labour protections. The argument being made can therefore be seen as arguing that workers who do not fit into all or most of the categories of young, white, slim, cisgender, a New Zealand citizen or permanent resident, and middle or upper class are not deserving of the same working conditions as those who are. The inherent intersecting axes of oppression which play out within the sex industry go unexamined in the further to utilise the sex industry as a soft news story or trend piece on the part of the news media, and as an opportunity to gain advertorial style coverage on the part of agency owners and managers.
Thank you. So, perfect time as well. So, we have enough time for questions. Anyone? So, a lot of thinking going on, I think.
Sorry, slightly kind of breakneck pace there.
No, it's good. You feel that rhythm. Yes.
So, thank you. I'm always fascinated by the New Zealand situation because, for some it's used as the example next to Holland of being the worst place to do sex working. For others, it's the example of how things should be or almost should be. So what you're saying here sort of is saying that there is a process of othering going on continually within the sex work industry. And I was wondering if you also see that in other areas, in other levels of sex work, not just between the higher and the lower, and the middle, let's say.
Right, so kind of like a stratification beyond just this kind of parlours and agencies. I think it does exist, but it definitely does exist in a more kind of like fine-grained sort of way. I think probably if I were to sort of make that a focus for future work, probably the easiest way to see that play out would actually be on review forums, because I think, and again it would vary from city to city. I think the particular kind of like hierarchies and nuances kind of play out differently in Auckland than they do in Wellington. I think a lot of it often does come down to money, to be really honest. Like, I think that there's a very different kind of perception of somebody that charges perhaps $260 an hour versus somebody that charges maybe $180. And so I think that a lot of that kind of like value is understood as being a very explicitly like financial value, monetary value, as seen as an indicator. And that's, I think, also kind of used as a proxy for busyness, and I think that kind of comes back to one of my sort of key points, which is that the number of clients seen is also taken to be kind of like an indicator of value and sexual value as a scarcity kind of.
Can I say, because that's a very interesting point, the fact that it's the less there is, the more you are, you know, and I think it's like that everywhere. Probably, if you can earn 2,000 American dollars with a couple of hours, of course, you know, it's saying where you are. The point is, and I think for us who aren't part of the New Zealand situation, context, it would be very interesting to see the relationship to this, the less is more, and the situation of a legalized or decriminalized sex work industry, because that would give us, there might be things that link there that we would have never, you know, thought about before, you know, because you talk about reform boards and review boards and things like that.
Yeah.
I imagine what that could be, but you know, it's not like I would know. So I think we, you know, but maybe I'm the only one that thinks that. No, yeah. So I think for people outside of New Zealand, it would become even more explosive, more interesting when we get that link in there, because it shows something that's not anywhere else. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
Good feedback. Yes, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you for that. I thought it was really interesting. I'm wondering whether maybe I misunderstood your argument, but you seem to be arguing from the fact that in certain public representations of their establishments, the owners make certain claims about the desirability of their workers. And you deduce from that the epithets and the terms they use to refer to their workers implies that other workers don't have the same sort of right, or they don't deserve. But do you not, in this case, put too much stress on what really is just an advertisement? And like if I say buy this washing powder, do I then imply that all other washing powders are less worthy of money? I mean, maybe I do, but don't you need to add something to?
That's a fair enough point. I think that's probably something that unfortunately suffers from this kind of being pulled out of the context of the rest of my thesis, where I sort of do a similar kind of analysis of media text dealing with workers who work in other ways, and I agree that that's something that doesn't necessarily come through particularly strongly if you're just looking at agency and independent workers. But once you put it in comparison with the words and phrases that are used to describe other workers, even other workers where they're being profiled, like Behind the Red Lights of New Zealand's sex industry is a really good example of this, because it has the comparison between the Pelican Club, which is a parlour in Auckland, and Bonton, and the journalist goes into the Pelican Club and speaks with several of the workers there, but uniformly they're all kind of like, you know, young girls, seems very timid, nervously chewing a thumbnail, that kind of descriptor, which is really quite infantilising and minimises the expertise of the workers, and it speaks about them in a way where they sort of they're not given a lot of agency of their own. And then, in comparison to the way that the agency workers at Bonton are spoken about in the same article, I think it really kind of draws it out and makes it a lot more clear. It makes it much clearer that the words used to describe them being so close to the advertorial kind of language of the websites is quite a sort of remarkable difference there.
Thank you. Okay.